So to understand race in the United States in my lifetime, what I wanted to be able to do was to understand how it got that way, where it came from, and what factors brought it about. It seems to me that in many cases, though there's no reason to think always, if you can see what forces had to come together to create and sustain something, and if you don't think that that thing that was created and sustained is a good thing, if you know what led to them and what was necessary for that to emerge and to remain, you can begin to chip away. You can first of all, you can get some hope, even if you don't see how to do it. You can get some hope that that thing could be dismantled, at least altered. Beyond hope, though, I think you can maybe begin to see ways that things could be made to change. That's always the hope in a genealogical study anyway. But so I found what I thought might be a point before which there was no racism of the sort that I grew up with. And I don't say in the book that this is a history of all kinds of racism. One of the limitations of the book is that it does not, I don't read Spanish, so I couldn't talk at all about how race played out in the Spanish colonies in the Americas. And since the Spanish colonized this part of the world before the English did, some of those factors were already in place. I also didn't talk at all about what was going on in the West Coast with Chinese immigrants in particular. Ronald Takaki has done some interesting work. He's an historian who's talked some about race and the way that it played out in the West. So anyway, I took these historians and I stole from them a lot of their work and ideas, a lot of their bibliographies, and I started reading all this stuff about how whiteness emerged. The colonies, of course, didn't have white people in them. They had British people and Irish people and Scots and Germans, and who didn't see that they necessarily had anything in common. So whiteness became a unifying force, and of course, the book is pretty explicit about how all this happens. I took some of Foucault's work on race as it developed in Europe. I found his work to be less than adequate in understanding race as it developed in North America, because he's very focused in his work on the development of Nazism. From a French perspective, especially from his perspective, growing up, being a child during the Nazi occupation of France, of course, what he's interested in primarily is anti-Semitism. And that doesn't quite map on to the U.S. History situation. But I modified some of his ideas and made the book out of that. So that's racism and sexual oppression. Of course, the other thing I did was to factor into the development of racism and white supremacy the ways in which that got biologized in the 19th and 20th centuries, and rolled into that was sexual deviation and then eugenics, the eugenics movement in the United States and elsewhere in the world in the early 20th century, and how that played out. The book goes up. I think I have a little bit to say about the 60s and maybe early 70s, but the book really goes up into the 50s, and that's about where it stops.